Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Vihari. So I would like to welcome Her Grace Krishnarupa Prabhu to our series of interviews for Books Are the Basis. I'm actually very honored to speak with her, and also with your colleagues or god sisters from Australia. It was very nice to have conversations with them about Srila Prabhupada's books. I would like to say that Krishnarupa Dasi is a member of ISKCON Australia's National Council and has been the Women's Minister for ISKCON Australia since 2016. And in this portfolio, she has developed local women's representatives in each temple to better support the Vaishnavis. She gives ongoing advice and care for the women in the temples around Australia and wherever the opportunity presents itself. You first joined the Melbourne Temple in 1972, and you also met Srila Prabhupada there. But then again, you met again the devotees in 1974 in Vrindavan and in Ramanreti. And then you received, for Janmashtami in 1974 in Vrindavan, you received first and second initiation from Srila Prabhupada. You also resided in Mayapur and served in Kolkata Temple as a pujari for Jagannath, Baladev, and Subhadra. So from 1975 to 1980, you lived in Mayapur. And in the 80s, after you got married and had 3 sons, you moved back to Australia, to Sydney. And then in 2014, you moved to, I don't know how to actually pronounce the name.
Murwillumbah.
That's in northern New South Wales, in close proximity to New Govardhan Temple. And your particular focus is in the arena of spiritual well-being for all devotees, but especially for Vaishnavis. And as an educator, you have developed a number of workshops, including the importance of women in ISKCON, the identification and prevention of sexual harassment, which, as per ISKCON National Council's resolution in 2017, you have presented it to all temples in Australia. You have also developed a seminar, Harmony in Home, which focuses on awareness and prevention of domestic and family violence. So this too has been also presented in Australia, as well to Russian and South African Vaishnavis. You are a member of the Spiritual Advisors Bhagavata Assembly, a body which works closely with the GBC and ISKCON members. And you're also a member of the Editing Review Panel, a group formed by the GBC and BBT to review any proposed edits to Srila Prabhupada's books. So this is really nice. We also have in a Vaishnavi ministry the topic actually about abuse and so on. So when I read your resume and your in a way I call it lifeline, what you did. I find it also very interesting. And also I like to introduce the Vaishnavis in this way because I think it's very interesting and also very inspiring for other Vaishnavis and also Prabhus to see like what devotees are doing in their life and to get inspired also. So thank you very much. It's very interesting. And I liked especially this part of the resume where you're in a board which is observing the editions of Srila Prabhupada's books, which means that you really are into Prabhupada's books. So it's perfect for our topic, Books Are the Basis. So thank you very much for coming. Also before...
And thank you, Loka.
And so even though I read the resume like this, I also would like that if you can say a little bit more in the sense of how you got to Krishna consciousness. I think those parts of devotees' lives are very, very interesting for our audience. And then we can move on and connect it with the reading of Prabhupada's books and so on. So how did you come to Krishna consciousness and what attracted you to Krishna consciousness?
Well, I guess I would probably have to backtrack a little bit before I actually met the devotees, because like probably quite a lot of devotees, I was very interested as a young person about about spiritual life. And I had been actually searching quite avidly since I was about 12. I was a bit of a serious kind of a girl, and I worked very hard to read lots of different books. I was pretty interested in Buddhism and also quite interested in, the Catholic religion. I'd been raised as a Catholic, so I was pretty absorbed in lives of the saints. So I was really looking for something. And so when a friend said, oh, guess what? I picked up a Hare Krishna hitchhiking the other day. And this was in probably early 1972. And the movement had just come to my city, which was in Melbourne, in Victoria. And I thought, oh, that's pretty fascinating. And he said, well, look, I'm not going to take up the invitation. They asked me to come to this Sunday love feast. We used to call it the love feast in those days, but you might like to go. So I thought, yeah, I would love to go. So that was my first meeting with Krishna consciousness in early 72.
So you came to the temple, and what did you like? Was it the food? Was it the philosophy? Was it the devotees or kirtan? So some always have something that attracts them.
Yeah, well, actually, interestingly enough, when I first went to the temple, of course, I liked the mood. I liked the devotees. They were very friendly and very nice. But we didn't have deities in those days in Melbourne, and we had lots and lots of pictures on the walls of Mother Yasoda and Baby Krishna. So coming from a Catholic background where there's lots of pictures of the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus, when I walked in, I thought, oh, that's the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus. I'm not really interested in that, because I had that whole rejection of Catholicism when I was about 12. So, I left a little bit dissatisfied. I did love the prasadam. Prasadam was very delicious. But yes, I thought, this isn't for me. This isn't for me. And it wasn't until about 6 months later when a friend of mine became a Hare Krishna. And I thought, oh, I should go make sure he's okay, that he's not being, brainwashed or anything like that. So that's when I started to get more serious. And he gave me a Bhagavad Gita, and I started to read the Bhagavad Gita. So that's kind of that little timeline of how, I became more immersed in Krishna consciousness.
Yeah. And then when was the point where you decided to go to Vrindavan?
That was quite. So I moved into the temple at the end of 72.
Mm-hmm.
And that was also quite funny, because I used to go and spend the weekends there, and then one of the managers at the temple would then drive us back to our various parents' homes. And I had no idea I could actually join. I don't know. I didn't think really, well, how do people get to live in the temple? And the person who used to drive me home said, oh, Bhaktin Carol, I think you could be a devotee. I think you could move into the temple. And I remember quite distinctly this look of surprise on my face and saying, oh, can I join? Can I move in? So it was only on that kind of invitation that I actually moved into the temple. And that's when I first met Srila Prabhupada, first got more immersed in bhakti yoga. But I didn't stay. I only stayed about a month, 6 weeks. And then for a number of reasons, I left. I won't go into them now, but I left. And then I'd always wanted to go to India since I was a teenager, or young teenager, actually. So a friend was going to India, and I thought, yes, I'll go also. And then I was in Bodh Gaya, where actually Lord Chaitanya had been to Gaya, and Bodh Gaya was known as the place where Lord Buddha was enlightened. So I was pretty interested, and I went there. And I met a fellow traveller, and I used to wear a little one thing of neck beads with a Govinda locket on it. And he said, oh, you are Hare Krishna. And I went, oh, well, Well, I only lived in the temple for a few weeks, but yes, I believe Krishna's God. Don't know that much about the philosophy, but yes, he said, do you know that they're having a first big international festival in Mayapur? And I hadn't heard of Mayapur. And I said, I don't know where that is. He said, don't worry, the first meeting in Vrindavan. And of course, I had heard of Vrindavan because I'd read Krishna book. So then I took a train to Vrindavan, and the first devotee I saw there was just a little construction site, a couple of feet of bricks. And the first devotee I saw there was Satsvarup Maharaj. And I couldn't distinguish the difference between a sannyasi. I just knew, there's a devotee. And I knew that when you saw a devotee, you had to offer obeisances. So I immediately fell on the ground, offered my obeisances. And surprisingly, he did too. He offered his obeisances back to me, which to this day, 50 years later or so, it really blows my mind. And then I stayed in the Association of Devotees, then went to Mayapur for that first International Gorpanim Festival, and then stayed in Calcutta Temple.
Yeah. And so it's very nice and very inspiring. And I also wanted to ask you, what was your impression of Srila Prabhupada, if you could share with us at the beginning of your Krishna consciousness? I know you met him in 1972 when he was in Australia, but also in Vrindavan, if you could share a little bit.
Yes, well, when I moved into the temple in end of 72, Prabhupada was due to come out to install Radha Vallabha, the beautiful deities in Melbourne, in, I think, January, I think. So particularly in those days, I mean, we still do it, of course, but particularly in those days, every single sentence or every other sentence was Prabhupada said. Prabhupada didn't like this, Prabhupada like that. So you're very absorbed in Prabhupada consciousness. And because I hadn't met Prabhupada, I started to feel a little concerned. Well, when I see Prabhupada, what if I don't have that same impression? What if I'm disappointed? So I was concerned about that, but, I needed to be open-minded, and I needed to feel that, well, if I didn't have that same impression, then that was my prerogative, kind of this faulty thinking. And when I actually saw Prabhupada, it was the most incredible experience of my life. And the Melbourne Temple then was a little terrace house, which means that it's very narrow frontage. And as soon as you walk into the door, more or less, there's a small hallway, then stairs leading up to the next floor. And because we didn't have really proper means of communication, you might be lucky if you got a phone call that Prabhupada was coming in a couple of days, or maybe in a telegram. Of course, no mobile phones or instant communication like we have now. So often either Prabhupada would arrive early or he would arrive later. So in this particular occasion, pretty much all the devotees had gone to the airport to pick him up, and there were only a few of us left back at the temple. And I remember we were, of course, madly painting everything and cleaning. And I just finished getting my sari on. And then I heard the wonderful sound that all of Prabhupada's disciples just love to hear. And that's Prabhupada is here, Prabhupada's here. So I remember I went dashing to the top of the stairs. And at that moment, Prabhupada, the door was open, and Srila Prabhupada was just framed in the doorway. And as soon as I saw Prabhupada, any doubts that I had about him was immediately smashed. Just, that 1 minute's association with a pure devotee. And then I knew that Srila Prabhupada's my eternal spiritual master. So it was very, his vapu was very, very, very powerful.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And how would you then how do you see the presence of Srila Prabhupada today, especially because we are now, this topic of this interview is books are the basis, and it's referring to Srila Prabhupada's books, because he brought everything to the Western world, and we base everything on his teachings. So how is your connection now with Srila Prabhupada? First it was Vapu, I guess now, now we call this Savani, but if you can say from your experience in your life, like after he departed and your relationship with him.
Well, it really didn't change. I never felt that Prabhupada wasn't here. I never felt that Prabhupada wasn't with me. Of course, there was that, deep separation from his vapu, from his transcendental form. So, that was such a transcendental experience, that not having that, not hearing that Prabhupada's here call as he arrived at a temple, of course, is something that's, very heartbreaking for his disciples. But just like Prabhupada said that my Guru Maharaj never left me, I also feel like I would say most of my God brothers and God sisters that Prabhupada never left us. So, he's such a pivotal and a linchpin for our movement that I always feel that connection. And of course, when you open up Prabhupada's books, that, it's the person Bhagavat speaking to you. And that's that direct link again with Srila Prabhupada. So, following his instructions, of course, and remembering all the wonderful times that, I experienced seeing Prabhupada. One of the great good fortunes of being in Mayapur and Calcutta in those early days was we would see Prabhupada quite a lot. He would visit India. And in Mayapur, he was there actually for 2 months, and we saw him every day, class, and then in the evening darshan. But of course, I can't wait until I see Prabhupada's form again in whatever form that takes. But that connection with him is so still very powerful for me. And of course, reading his books, you get to know Prabhupada so intimately. And there's lots of very, of course, there's, the information, the knowledge. Then Prabhupada says things about himself personally that really gets a window into the great personality of Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you. And then how did your relationship with Prabhupada's books started? So you said that at the beginning of your Krishna consciousness, you received Bhagavad Gita. So how did you find it? Were you a bookworm like some devotees are, or a little bit later it started? How was your relationship with?
Well, we didn't have many books. We had the Bhagavad Gita. In Australia, I don't remember seeing any Bhagavatams. We did have a Nectar of Devotion. They may have been Bhagavatams, but I didn't see them. But the Bhagavad Gita I was given as a gift. So I used to read that avidly, and then I'd write down all my questions. And then I would take the list of questions we had a storefront in the Melbourne CBD. And I'm lucky that I would have Madhavisa Swami often answering my questions. And he was such an expert preacher and had such a deep knowledge of the philosophy. So he'd answer all those questions satisfactorily to me. And I went, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I'd go away and I'd read some more and write more questions. And once again, they would be answered. So in those early days, it was the Gita. In terms of like real serious studying of Prabhupada's books, probably didn't happen for me till the 80s. And that's when I really started to, not that I'm any kind of a scholar, but that's when I really started to read, study, take notes of Prabhupada's books. For those early parts, for me was mostly lots and lots of service, because in Mayapur, now there's thousands of devotees. Then there are only about 4 Western women, sometimes only 3. And then there were maybe 20 Bengali Matajis. a few Western male devotees, and once again, maybe 20, 30 Bengali Prabhus. So we had lots and lots of service. I sewed for Radha Madhava. I was their seamstress, cleaned all of Prabhupada's quarters every day, did all the garlands, picked the flowers and made the garlands. So there wasn't a great deal of time. When the CC came out, of course, I started reading the CC, but if memory serves me correctly, it was those early 80s. That's when I really started to hone in on reading Prabhupada's books, I'd say. More thoroughly. I mean, you read, but just not as thoroughly.
And why do you think it's important to read Prabhupada's books like every day, especially like devotees in the spiritual life, that they should put the reading of Prabhupada's books, or I mean any devotional books, as a part of their sadhana? Why do you think that's important?
Yeah, well, that's so important that we do have that deep connection with Prabhupada. And Prabhupada always said that regular reading is very critical to our spiritual life, because we can chant, we can do service, but the books give us the reasons why we're chanting and why we're doing the service. So if we don't have that that philosophical understanding, then we can get burnt out. You can do too much service, or never too much, but can do a lot of service, but without getting the books into your head, without reading them ideally daily. It's just like having a dose of Prabhupada every day. It's like, and the fact that you can read something over and over again and you'll get new highlights each time. It's so important. And I was speaking to a devotee the other day, and I said, why don't you give Bhagavatam class? And she said, I just don't have time to read Prabhupada's books. And she has a young family, so it's, not easy. But I felt that, you're really missing out on something if you don't at least read a verse a day, even if it's just that. Because you open the Bhagavatam or any Prabhupada's books, and it's Prabhupada, because he's that, he's the person who's giving us that knowledge, and has a really profound impact on us. And you find such gems in there, such gems, like in, and I'm rereading Bhagavatam now, so there's a lot of things that I can't believe that I actually missed. Yeah. When you read that rereading, it's a little bit more thorough, and because there's been years in, devotional service realizations, that you understand things more. And some devotees may have read Bhagavatam many, many times, but I'm on my second reading, thorough reading. And there's one part in fourth canto, it's chapter 20, verse 25. And Prabhupada's talking about how the voice of the pure devotee, it touches the saffron mercy particles scattered on the Lord's lotus feet. And because it's come in contact with those mercy particles, and even though the voice may appear to be from the material sky, that voice has the power to waken up your devotional service. I mean, this is my, synopsis of it. So when I read that, I was so, it really stunned me, because that's, Prabhupada's voice. And of course, we hear Prabhupada's voice in his lectures, all of these wonderful recordings that we have, but we hear his voice in Bhagavatam. So connecting with Prabhupada through his books is a wonderful way to connect.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing the purport, actually, of that verse. I personally love it. I heard it first time in one lecture that Gargamuni Prabhu, he was giving, and then he mentioned this because he was emphasizing why also it was important to read Prabhupada's books, how this is not an ordinary ordinary thing, these books, even though maybe we don't hear the
Yes.
sound, just the reading also has that effect.
Mm. And for the sake of the listeners, that verse is Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th Canto, chapter 20, verse 25, and the purport. And then there was another one that really, really had a powerful impact on me. And as I said before, the reading Prabhupada's books gives you an insight into Srila Prabhupada, his personality. And in that, it's 4:12:33. I wrote it down, 4:12:33. And it's when Dhruva Maharaj is about to get on the transcendental aeroplane. And in the purport to that verse, Prabhupada says, I may be crippled in so many ways, but if I can make one disciple like Dhruva Maharaj, he can take me back to Vaikuntha. And when I read that, tears came into my eyes. Srila Prabhupada, that profound humility that he would even consider that he's crippled in so many ways, where we know that he's coming from the spiritual world. But when I read things like that, it's like, this is Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you for sharing that as well. So in the way we can say that by reading Prabhupada's books, all the generations now, the current generations and the generations to come, they all have the opportunity to connect with Srila Prabhupada. And sometimes even, I mean, if you read the books, then you can understand how the connection works. But we're here now to inspire some devotees who maybe don't have don't read so much regularly, and maybe they think like, well, you know, it's more easy to connect with someone who is present now, like who is alive with us. But like Prabhupada and the books, maybe for them, it seems like that there cannot be connection and that they cannot know him so well. But what would you say to someone who would be skeptical like that in that sense?
Well, it's really part of the duty of the current living gurus, our current ISKCON gurus, to impress upon their disciples the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. I'm just going to turn a light on here. And without mentioning names, I know of a spiritual master who almost makes it like a fifth vow, that every day his disciples will read X amount of pages of Srila Prabhupada's books. And he wants them more or less to read them 7 times, all the books. So that's very important. If your spiritual master is ordering you, you must read Srila Prabhupada's books. Then he's doing that for a reason, very important reason. And then, of course, you know, we have books about Srila Prabhupada. So the Lilamrita, the authorized biography of Srila Prabhupada. There's many, you know, wonderful books that his senior disciples have written of their memories of Srila Prabhupada. So they all also give you a taste of directing you to reading Prabhupada's books. But, you know, ISKCON won't be successful unless we have that relationship with Prabhupada. It's so imperative. And that relationship with Srila Prabhupada is developed even before you decide to get initiated by one of our living gurus. It's, you know, that first year, 6 months to a year, should be focused on listening to Prabhupada's lectures, listening to memories of Prabhupada, reading Lilamrita, reading his books, listening to his lectures. And then after a year of doing that, you've actually developed your own relationship with Prabhupada, and you've reached some spiritual maturity also. And then you can start, you know, looking around, I guess, and listening to, you know, a little bit more of a focus on listening to other gurus who might be, you know, would accept you as a prospective disciple. But if you don't have that connection with Prabhupada, then it's, you know, it's not going to be as rich. And of course, you know, there's always that situation, just like when you're on an airplane, the stewardess will point to the exits, in case of an accident, this is where you go, do this, do that. So it's not that you expect that you're actually going to have a plane crash, although it does happen sometimes. So if you don't have that personal connection with Prabhupada, if by some unfortunate circumstance your initiating guru falls down, then if you only have that connection with him and not with Prabhupada, then you'll feel very lost. But if you have that strong connection with Srila Prabhupada, then that will help you over any difficulties in that regard. And unfortunately, it happens occasionally, so we have to think about that.
Yeah. That's definitely true. And ISKCON has its history. And anyway, a lot of devotees did take shelter in instructions of Srila Prabhupada in whatever happened in their lives. So in that sense, it's like Srila Prabhupada is the unchangeable, like perfect example. So we can always take shelter in him. So
yes. He's like that great big huge pot of delicious sweet rice. We can get ladles of that, but Prabhupada's that great big receptacle of mercy. So we always want to keep that connection.
And because you are, I read, and I read it to others now in your resume that you help other devotees in their spiritual life, and that you are an educator. So how do you see that, or how do you see, if you can say a little bit, like how do Prabhupada's books help devotees in their lives, especially when they're encountering problems and so on?
Well, when you read Prabhupada's books, it helps us see the world through a transcendental lens. Mm-hmm. It helps us understand that, yes, we are experiencing, the vicissitudes of life. That's to be expected. This is the material world after all. But the books helps us understand why we're suffering and ultimately how we can get out of that suffering. That's not to say that, devotees don't need shoulders to lean on or nurturing or encouragement. And that's what I try to do. I'm not saying I'm always successful, but I try and see that as a little bit of a goal of mine, that, to be someone that devotees can turn to if they need to talk confidentially or if they need some particular help. But it's always the books that will get us through. Of course, chanting and devotional service, that's very important. But and I think we've all had that experience when we're going through some troubling situation and we just open Bhagavatam and it's like that verse is meant for me. And I think we've all probably experienced that. And it's super soul's directing our hands.
Yeah. It's like the books are helping us to live a spiritual life when we read them, because it's like, a lot of devotees in the interviews that we had, and a lot of devotees that were not maybe in interviews, but they shared their realizations how these books are like a living, they're a living force. I don't know how to say. They correspond with whatever you have in your heart, and they reveal things to you. So do you have such experience also when you read Prabhupada's book?
Yeah, well, yes. I can't think of any specific experience, but it's happened many times that, something's been troubling me or I'm going through a difficult period in my life and I open the Bhagavatam or the Gita and it's like that verse is there.
Yeah.
For me. Yeah. So we've all got that practical understanding and that relationship with the books. And, of course, it takes a while to get into a good reading habit. Mm-hmm. I've had periods of time where my reading hasn't been very good. And when you resume reading again, I found at least it's really hard because you've kind of lost that little taste. But you know that if you just keep on persevering, it might be just sheer force of will. No, I must sit down and I must read for whatever it is, 15 minutes, half an hour, an hour. And you know that over a period of time, that taste will develop. Then you look forward to, oh, this is my reading time. But it's not going to come necessarily, it's not going to come automatically. You might have to work a bit for it, but that taste will be there. Just like without chanting, you may not immediately develop a taste for chanting, but if we keep on persevering, that chanting will become part of us, that we're always want to chant. So same with reading.
Yeah. And what is your experience now with reading? Do you read every day? Or do you also share with other devotees? What do you find inspiring in reading?
Well, I had a Nectar of Devotion reading group for quite a while. We have unfortunately, terminated that temporarily. And that was very enjoyable because then we can do that on Zoom, when we had our lockdowns and what have you. But I generally, on average, I would read every day. There might be some days where, I've just gotten too busy or, something's happened and I can't get to the books. And a friend of mine, one of my two of my god sisters, and they may have even mentioned this to you in their interviews, they have a very nice thing called the Bhagavatam Buddy.
Yeah.
So every day they read a verse and then they analyze that verse. They WhatsApp WhatsApp message their take from the purport. And then they also will give feedback to the others. So they can do a really thorough study of Bhagavatam that way. So I really like that system. And I recently went away with these two god sisters on like a spiritual retreat, unofficial spiritual retreat. And we did that Bhagavatam Buddy thing, but in person. And it was really wonderful. It was really wonderful. So we do that for like an hour and a half in the morning. Then we'd go for a walk. After, we'd chanted our rounds very early. Then we'd do Bhagavatam Buddy. And then at the end of the day, we would read Nectar of Devotion for an hour. So when you do read in association of devotees, that's very stimulating because you get lots of different views of the same thing. So for people devotees who may be listening to this recording when it's posted, try and find yourself a Bhagavatam Buddy. And that will be inspiring, or find someone to read with you, even if that is once a week. And then you do your private reading in between. And you soon will develop such a taste. I remember in the early 80s and I explained to you, that's when I had kind of really started to read and study Prabhupada's books. And I was sitting in my lounge room, and I had just, my schedule allowed it. I had 2 hours reading every day, and I would read and take notes, and I was studying. And I remember just sitting there one day thinking, this is the happiest time, just to have such an absorption in reading. It was very ecstatic, really. So we get to that if we just, bite the bullet, so to speak, and just make a vrata that I'm going to read every day, even if it's not for very long. But that reading really inspires.
That's true.
I mean, after all, as you know, Prabhupada read his own books.
Yes, definitely. I just wanted to share because a week ago we had a sangha at my home, and there was this Bhakta Christian who's a relatively new devotee, but very dedicated. And he said that he wanted to read Srimad Bhagavatam, and then he would go to sleep at 8 p.m. in the evening and wake up at 2 a.m. He's a brahmachari. And then he would read for 2 or 3 hours Bhagavatam. And that's how he finished it in a year or in 2 years. I was fascinated by that, like the discipline of reading. And he's very knowledgeable. So um, it's also like I would also say, like, if you want to have success in gaining transcendental knowledge from reading, we also need to put it as a part of our sadhana. It's not only the chanting is the sadhana or the service, but this as well.
Yes, and the reading's just like an option, when you do it as part of that. And that's really amazing that devotee
Yes.
would do that, get up so early and read. Of course, that would be a great time to actually have the focus of mind as well.
Everything's peaceful then.
Mm.
So my next question would be, we oftentimes, say how we should look at the world through the vision of the scriptures. So what is your experience? Is your vision becoming more and more according to the scriptures, or it helps you to see the transcendental way, in a transcendental way? If you can share some of your experiences.
Well, look, without without sounding very kind of puffed up, and I don't mean to sound like that at all, because I I don't think I have very good qualities, but that absorption in reading, and of course, a Krishna conscious attempted a Krishna conscious life, you actually it becomes second nature in a way, to view everything through the spiritual lens, like the aging body. Go, oh, okay, this body is not functioning as well as it used to function. And then you think of birth, death, disease, old age, I have to start preparing for death. It's pretty much becomes second nature, I think, and the reading, of course, helps that.
Mm.
And I think for devotees who may not read or may not have a regular reading program, if they set that up for 21 days, because to say 21 days is the time it takes to create a new habit, or break an old, a bad one, but setting yourself 21 days of reading every day. And I'm pretty confident that would really help develop a taste for reading. It really would.
Definitely.
I hope I answered your question.
Yes. And I also wanted to ask, like, since you are at this board that is overviewing the editing of Prabhupada's books and so on, I don't know. I just wondered, this is actually my question, because sometimes when we try to bring the philosophy to new people, we can sometimes say that the language that Prabhupada uses in his books is maybe not so much understandable to new generations. But I personally think that it's actually relevant to every generation. But what would you say, like, because especially because you are in this editing board to oversee
the reviewing?
Yeah.
Yes, I would. We're guided by a set of principles that we use when we're looking at the potential editing changes. And one of the principles is that we don't update the language to conform to current social norms. So it has to be Prabhupada's voice. And then it's the principle of Asha Prayoga, the voice of the Acharya.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very fine examination that, okay, is this something that does need some improvements in, like, not improvements, how can you improve Srila Prabhupada, but making it, the principle, a little clearer if it's absolutely necessary. But there's aspects of Prabhupada's voice that you would never change. or you would never propose an edit to it. So trying to update Prabhupada's language to suit current language usage would mean that you'd be constantly doing that, because language usage changes so much, you know, that we have words that are used now that Prabhupada wouldn't have used.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's more difficult parts of Bhagavatam that perhaps might be very controversial.
Yeah.
We haven't got to those yet, but we would recommend a footnote or an endnote or something like that. So you can't change the voice of the Acharya. You can make some minor additions, alterations to make the message clearer, but you can't change Prabhupada's voice. It's so important.
And what would be maybe your advice for future generations regarding a reading of Prabhupada's books and connecting with Srila Prabhupada?
Keep on doing it. You know, like we know Prabhupada said 10,000 years, law books for humanity. So it's not that things are going to be so different. Why won't they be different? Because there's always birth, death, disease, and old age. There's always the pondering of the big existential questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What's going to happen when I die? You know, they're questions that it's intrinsic to any thoughtful person. So that message is always going to be sought, and Prabhupada's answer to those questions is always going to be there in his books.
And Prabhupada, yes, please.
No, I was going to say, you know, and hopefully there won't be worldwide destruction where, you know, all the books go up in flames or something. You know, we have to guard those very carefully.
Yeah.
But what was good for us in 1972 or 1969, 1966 will be the same as it was for 1980 and now in 2022, and then another, you know, 9,000 plus years from now.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
It's not going to alter drastically. That's my opinion anyway.
Yes. I mean, I also think that if that was not the truth, then new generations wouldn't be attracted to books, and they are. So everyone.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. And you look now that, you know, so many young people are so attracted to a Krishna conscious lifestyle, and so attracted to chanting, and so attracted to reading. It's very inspiring. You know, at our temple at New Govardhan, we have on the farm, there's a place that we call Krishna Village. So that's when yoga teacher training takes place. That's when, which includes study of the Gita, chanting 16, you know, chanting japa, maybe not 16 rounds. And they'll come up to the temple, be part of the temple program. And then over time, if they're really interested and they want to stay longer, then they come to what we call Krishna Pad, which is like a halfway between Krishna Village and moving into an ashram. And there's so many sincere souls, it's so fired up, and you'll see them, they've only been devotees for a couple of months. And the way they come to Mangalati every day, the way they chant so in such a focused way. And, you know, they're very interested in reading and studying Prabhupada's books. So there's always going to be that that aspect of you know, newer generations as they come.
Yeah. Especially because the movement is growing. That's why I find the advice of you and your god sisters about finding a Bhagavatam buddy. It's quite important, because I would say that even if we should read, but we should also speak. I mean, about what we read, because that's the way how we will remember what we read. So in that sense, this sharing is quite nice. And also, as I understood from the lectures that I've heard, is the way to develop friendships, but Krishna conscious friendships in our movement. And then,
yes,
yeah,
yeah, very, very much so. Yeah, to have that sharing of what you read also helps, as you say, helps you remember it. So when you're reading something and it strikes you, it's always good to then, when you see a friend, to say, "Oh, I was just reading the other day," and it helps them because they're hearing it, and helps you because you're remembering it. And when I read, I try and I have a typical Kali Yuga memory, and as getting older, then the memory also becomes impacted. So I always, and I've been doing this since the 80s actually, I have a large notebook that is alphabeticized. So it's like an index book. So you can imagine if you kept your phone contacts in a book, and it's an A4, so it's large. And then as I'm reading, if something strikes me, so, oh, such an interesting verse or a bit of information, it's so interesting, I put it under the corresponding alphabetical letter. So if later on we're going, now what was that I read about Lord Brahma the other day, that I go to B for Brahma, and then I've written that down. And I find that really helpful when you're preparing for giving classes. And I find it really helpful for when you're, trying to remember what you've read.
yeah, I know about the Kali Yuga brain. I mean, I could remember something, but it just slips away. So I don't think it has something to do with age, just the Kali Yuga brain. So goes away.
Possibly. But that because you can take notes, but you can have a notebook and you go, now where did I put that? But when you've got it alphabetically, it's very easy to find straight away. And I find that a very useful study tip.
Yeah. And also I sometimes emphasize things like that. For instance, today is the age of technical things, like computers, mobile phones. And I know Kandambakanana Swami would sometimes say, like, oh, your best friend is actually your mobile phone. You always have it with you. You have a more intimate relationship with your phone than anyone else in your life. But actually, that's unfortunately true for a lot of us. But also, like, it just like, if we focus on books, then we also I don't know, I would say also, like, develop this like a healthier way of grasping reality and thinking and being philosophical than just like what today people are doing, just staring at the screens. And if there is only a quote of 3 or 4 words, that's enough. But I think we should go deeper in that sense, and that in that sense these books are so important because they help us to yeah.
If you lose your mobile phone, then if you've written it down on the old style, pen and paper, you've got it. And I've had one of my books since 1982, and then I started to run out of space, so I got another one. So then if I want to look up something, I have to look in both books, but it only takes me a couple of minutes because it's there under the alphabetical combination.
Yeah, very true. Thank you. And can you say something like, this will be my last question. So, if, like, for you, from what you've grasped in your spiritual life, so why do you think that, again, the books are the basis for nurturing our spiritual life? And maybe in your realization, if you can just give and emphasize one more time on your concluding advice.
Well, Prabhupada said books are the basis. Utility is the principle, purity is the force. So Prabhupada didn't say that for the sake of saying it. It's actually, without Prabhupada's books, then we're like a ship with a faulty rudder. We can only go in one direction. but having the books there, that's something, you know, people may speculate on so many things, you know, oh, well, they may even refer to other Bhakti Sastras, but Prabhupada's books, they are there for us. And when we really study them and we can go, well, actually, Prabhupada says this in Bhagavatam, then we know that we're right at that main source. So if we don't, it's just like, you know, we're not. I don't know if anyone's, you know, anti-vax, but it's like not being vaccinated.
Oh,
I'm not pro-vax either. I'm just
no.
saying,
Yeah,
you know, you've got to, you know, have that kind of, you know, that medicine of Prabhupada's books. There, you know, they're our friend and our companion. And whether you look at it on a Kindle or you know, a hardbound. Personally, I like to look at, you know, paper books,
yeah,
because I look at the screen so often that, you know, my eyes prefer it when I'm reading in, you know, with a paper book, book made of paper.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you for all that you shared with us and for your all realizations. We are very grateful. I wish you all the best in everything that you do.
You give me your blessings for continued study and reading of Prabhupada's books.
You know, I have to say that I can always wish for the best, but you're my senior, so how can I give blessings? So in that sense, I have to say it like that. But yes, of course, I wish always all the best for you.
Thank you so much, Loka Pavani.
And thank you so
And
much. Yes.
thank you for this opportunity to talk about Srila Prabhupada and Srila Prabhupada's wonderful books.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Rama